From the Historic Desk, this is The Almost Rands, our monthly resurrection of the 10 dispatches that came tantalizingly close to winning their day, only to be edged out at the last bell. The readers loved them. The clock did not. Tonight, for July 2026, they get their hearing, filed, applauded, and very nearly forgotten until now. Number 10, filed by Professor Anand Zero-Sum Subramaniam, the Accountant of Constantinople. How one scribe's shitty handwriting accidentally invented bureaucracy. They say the flapping of a butterfly's wings can cause a hurricane. Well, the misscribbled dot of a fly's shit on an astronomical chart in 821 AD caused something far, far worse, the spreadsheet. Our hero, if you can call a man this monumentally pissed off a hero, is Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizm. You can thank him for the word algorithm. You can also, in this timeline, thank him for the soul-eating horror of administrative bloat. While proofing the Caliphate's brand-spanking new Zij al-Sindin tables, a masterwork of celestial mathematics, he found an error. A tiny, infuriating, cosmically insignificant discrepancy in the orbital calculations of Venus. A number that was off by a decimal point. It was a fart in the symphony of the cosmos, and Al-Khwarizm was the only one with a sensitive enough nose to smell it. His rivals at the House of Wisdom in Baghdad probably just fudged the numbers. Not this magnificent bastard. No, he was convinced the original data, inherited from dusty Greek texts, was flawed. The source must be purged. So began the world's first inter-empire IT support ticket. After convincing Caliph al-Ma'mun that this wasn't just a full-blown OCD-fueled tantrum, it was, he set off for the only place that might have the originals, the Imperial Library of Constantinople. A fun destination if you enjoy being shadowed by secret police and sneered at by eunuchs who think your turban is gauche. For months, Al-Khwarizm, a pearl of Abbasid genius, was trapped in the waiting room of a Byzantine functionary named Georgios, a man whose face was a festival of boils and whose primary function was to say no in 14 different ways. He was the human embodiment of a 404 error. Stuck in this purgatory of paperwork, Al-Khwarizm started studying the only texts they'd let him see. Manuals on Byzantine administration. He marveled at the tiered systems of the themata, the Byzantine heo protocols for tax collection, the sheer procedural artistry of it all. He didn't find the astronomical answer he sought. He found something better. He saw a system for managing unknowns, for balancing inputs and outputs, for restoring and completing, not equations, but processes. He had a revelation, but it wasn't about numbers. It was about power. In the margins of a treatise on provincial grain levies, he sketched out his new system, Al-Jaba. Not as a way to find a number, but as a way to find which bastard has the document you need. He returned to Baghdad a changed man. His compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing was not a slim, elegant volume on solving for x in a. It was a 900-page behemoth on workflow optimization for empires. The variable x wasn't an unknown quantity, it was the number of donkeys required to ship petitionary forms from Damascus to the capital. Quadratic equations were adapted to calculate the declining morale of clerks based on the number of approvals required. This wasn't mathematics, it was the sacred geometry of the DMV. And the decimal point, oh, that. A bleary-eyed cleaner wiped the fly speck off the original chart with a damp rag about a week after he left. Al-Khwarizm never knew. He'd just inflicted organized clerical suffering on the world for absolutely no goddamn reason. Number 9. filed by Dr. Priya Anand Okafor, The Soprano of the Damned. How one asylum director tried to cure hysteria with off-key Verdi and mostly just invented noise pollution. Of all the batshit ways physicians have tried to tame the so-called female malady of hysteria, and believe me, the list is long and includes hits like ice water enema and let me just rearrange your uterus with my bare hands. Few were as gloriously, spectacularly wrong as Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride's disastrous foray into musical theatre in 1877. Kirkbride, a man whose chief contribution to medicine was designing asylums that were so large and labyrinthine they could have had their own weather systems, got a brilliant idea. He read a book, probably upside down, and decided that the wandering womb and its attendant emotional flare-ups were just pent-up dramatic energy. What these sad, listless, or occasionally shrieking women needed wasn't rest or goddamn rights. They needed an outlet. They needed to sing, loudly, preferably in Italian. He called it operatic catharsis therapy, because giving a stupid idea a fancy name is half the battle in medicine. So the grand experiment began at his flagship Pennsylvania Hospital for the Insane. Patients were sorted not by diagnosis, but by vocal range. Every day at 10 a.m., the common room was transformed into a stage for a mandatory, and I must stress, profoundly off-key, reenactment of La Traviata. You haven't lived until you've heard 20 women diagnosed with melancholia attempting the Brindisi duet, accompanied by a single, suicidal-looking orderly on an out-of-tune piano. Costumes were bedsheets and whatever could be pilfered from the laundry. The role of Alfredo was played by a particularly glum-looking broom. According to one nurse's smuggled-out diary, the caterwauling is continuous. Mrs. Albright, admitted for heightened sensibilities, tried to stab Mr. Henderson, the broom, with a fork for missing his cue. The cure appears to be worse than the disease and infinitely louder. The most deranged part? When it obviously, catastrophically failed to calm anyone, Kirkbride doubled down. La Traviata was too gentle, he declared. These hysterics needed something with more oomph. They needed Wagner. Soon the asylum halls echoed with a truly cursed rendition of Ride of the Valkyries, which mostly involved patients in bedpan helmets screeching and running headlong into walls. The project was only shut down 6 months later when a visiting board of trustees, hoping for a tour of Kirkbride's famously serene asylum, walked into the middle of what looked and sounded like the final bloody act of Tosca, if it were performed by enraged geese. Kirkbride was quietly shuffled off to an advisory role, and his magnum opus was scrubbed from the official records, remembered only as The Unpleasantness. Number 8, filed by Wren Hothouse Pemberton Aoki, The Bog Heresy. How one sleep-deprived botanist and a smudge of ink convinced half of Sweden their new gods were carnivorous vegetables. All right, buckle up, you magnificent bastards, because today we're talking about Carl Linnaeus. Yes, that Linnaeus, the prissy Swedish bastard who gave us binomial nomenclature and a classification boner for every living thing on God's green earth. Turns out, he also nearly gave us a new state religion centered on Venus flytraps, through no fault of his own, I might add. The man just had shitty handwriting. Enter Stellan Eklund. Eklund was one of Linnaeus's less earthed students, a real high-on-his-own-supply type who thought botany was just a chat room with God. In 1772, while transcribing Linnaeus's private and famously messy diaries, Eklund stumbled upon a section describing the Drosera, or Sondu. Linnaeus, in a moment of proto-Attenborough wonder, noted how the plant's sticky, glistening tentacles ensnared insects, calling it a sublime example of Guds Werk, God's work. But Eklund, bleary-eyed from lamp oil, and what I can only assume was a diet of fermented herring and academic anxiety, read it as Guds Vicari, God's vicar. This one-letter fuck-up sent Eklund into a spiral of glorious, world-breaking insanity. He wasn't looking at a plant, he was looking at a holy representative, a non-verbal pope for the insect kingdom. This wasn't predation, it was rapture, a holy sacrifice. Eklund declared carnivorous plants to be the true chthonic deities of the natural world, and their consumption of insects a divine sacrament. Within a year, he'd founded the first congregation of the vicarial sundew near a bog outside Uppsala. His followers, a motley crew of disenchanted Lutherans and people who just really, really hated flies, wore moss-green robes and communicated in a series of solemn liturgical buzzes. Naturally, it all went to shit. The congregation soon splintered. The pitcher plant purists argued for a doctrine of passive acceptance, just fall in the goo and be digested, you sinners, while the radical fly-trap faction believed in a more active, vengeful God who snapped shut on the unworthy. Eklund, trying to keep his flock together, staged a grand ceremony of the Great Tithe, releasing tens of thousands of flies over his sacred bog. This did less to appease the new gods and more to create a public health crisis that officials later dubbed Flugskittenkrisen, the Great Flyshit Crisis. The whole fiasco finally collapsed when Eklund, attempting a final communion to become one with his deity, was found face down in an unusually large pitcher plant. The coroner's report was a masterpiece of Scandinavian minimalism, listing the cause of death as asphyxiation, but noting, with what I have to imagine was a completely straight face, subject presented with an unusually devout expression. Number 7, filed by Tobias Barometer Kjellberg Nyong. Volcano fucks Dynasty. Film at 11. How one geological ass blast fast-tracked the Ming dynasty's glorious implosion. All right, let's set the scene. It's 1641. The Ming dynasty, once the gleaming jewel of civilization, inventor of fuck-off huge fleets and quality porcelain, is having a real bad century. The treasury is emptier than a eunuch's codpiece, the little ice age has everyone's balls frozen solid, and the peasants are revolting. Again. On the dragon throne sits the Chongzhen Emperor, a man whose primary political strategy was to fire, or, execute, any minister who brought him bad news. A real catch. He's juggling rebellions, Manchu raiders, and a cripplingly expensive court full of concubines who probably faked every single orgasm he ever witnessed. The whole empire is a goddamn powder keg. Then some volcano in China, let's call it Mount Fuckery, sources are hazy, decides to blow its ever-loving lid. We're talking a VEI 6 eruption, a proper caldera-forming bastard that belches millions of tons of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. The sky across China goes dark, not, oh, it's a bit overcast, dark. We're talking, where's the goddamn sun? Apocalyptic gloom. Global temperatures tank. Crops fail on a continental scale. The mandate of heaven, officially revoked by Mother Nature, who was clearly in a foul mood. The ensuing famine wasn't just bad, it was inventive. According to the probably forged diary of one court eunuch, the peasants are eating tree bark, the nobles are eating the peasants, and the emperor is trying to fuck the famine away. Results are mixed. The existing peasant rebellions, led by Li Zicheng and the absolute psychopath Zhang Xianzhong, suddenly got a shot of adrenaline straight to the heart. Li Zicheng, a former postal worker laid off thanks to the emperor's budget cuts, a real man of the people, finds his recruitment numbers go from disgruntled farmers to basically everyone with a pulse and an empty stomach. His army swells into a multi-million-man freeloading catastrophe rolling towards Beijing. Meanwhile, Zhang Xianzhong, a fellow who history remembers for his 7 kills stele and a body count that would make a plague blush, gets to indulge his homicidal urges on a dynasty-wide scale. There was no longer any time for court intrigue or elaborate defenses. The end wasn't coming. It was already kicking the door in. Instead of the historical slow bleed culminating in 1644, the whole damn thing collapses in a year. By the winter of 1642, Li Zicheng's horde isn't besieging Beijing, they're using the damned walls for firewood. The Chongzhen emperor, seeing the writing on the wall and the starving peasantry scaling it, gives his empress the imperial go-ahead to kill herself, tries and fails to murder his own daughter with a sword, and then marches his ass out to a tree in the palace garden and hangs himself. When the Manchus finally pour south past the Great Wall, expecting a fight, they just find a smouldering crater of a capital, a dead emperor, and a bunch of rebels who are already starting to fight each other. They basically inherited a kingdom-sized bar fight after last call. What a fucking anticlimax. Number 6, filed by Cassandra Cassie Vexley. The Condor Queens of CUZCO. Before the Wright brothers, there were the wrong bitches. Suck it, Orville. Long before some Ohio bicycle bros got a glorified kite airborne for 12 seconds, a guild of absolute mad women in the Andes was staging the world's first and, arguably, best aerial opera. We're talking sometime around 900 AD, give or take a century I can't be bothered to look up. Forget pottery and textiles. The real artistic innovation of the pre-Inca world was the Wamifawan, the Flying Women, a sorority of sopranos with more balls than a llama ranch and the lung capacity to prove it. Their technology was equal parts genius and batshit insanity. They'd strap themselves into harnesses woven from the finest vicuña wool, a material so soft it was basically a continuous, full-body orgasm attached to enormous wings. These weren't your flimsy Da Vinci sketches. We're talking massive frames of balsa wood covered in the plucked feathers of every giant condor they could get their hands on, making them both the world's first aviators and the world's most fabulous ecological disaster. The lead diva, a terrifyingly ambitious woman named Cusi, was said to have a wingspan of 30 feet and a voice that could shatter limestone from 1,000 yards. Her pre-flight ritual? A gourd of fermented maize beer and screaming at a rock until it developed anxiety. And the opera? Holy shit. The plots made Wagner look like a minimalist. One surviving and probably fake libretto, The Horny Mountain and the Chaste Llama, tells the epic tale of an amorous volcano god, Apu Pubsali, who threatens to erupt all over a defenseless valley unless the Sky Maiden sings him to a gentle, non-lava-based climax. The famous Nazca lines? Those weren't for aliens, you simpletons. They were stage directions. The geoglyph of the monkey is where the chorus would perform their big number about sexually transmitted debt. As one alleged eyewitness, a ground crew member named Paco, is quoted on a recently discovered potsherd. The pay was terrible and the costumes were a bitch to clean, but when Cusi hit her high note right as the sun set over the Andes, well, it was almost worth getting shat on from 200 feet up. The whole glorious enterprise came crashing down, as these things do, because of carbs. With fame came feasts, and with feasts came a collective and catastrophic failure of the lift-to-drag ratio. The final performance of The Potato's Revenge was a notorious disaster. Cusi, fresh off a celebratory binge of 27 different kinds of tubers, apparently achieved a flight trajectory best described as a brick with ambition. Her slow, operatic descent into a cushy bog marked the end of the aerial opera. The Spaniards, arriving centuries later, found only fossilized feathers and a lingering sense of theatrical despair. They declared it the devil's work, because of course they did. No one ever suspects the humble potato. Number 5. Filed by Seosa Bobbin Ni Loingsai. The Denim Dynasty. How Ming China accidentally invented jeans and lost an empire. Banned from silk, the masses got the blues, and so did the emperor right then. Gather round, you wee gobshites, and let Bobbin tell you why every pair of jeans in your wardrobe is a ghost story about imperial arrogance. The year is, let's say, 1368, and the Hongwu emperor, Zhu Yuanzhang, is having a terrible time. He's just kicked the Mongols out, founded a new Ming dynasty, and now he's got to get China in order. And his big idea for this? A set of rules that would make a homeowners association blush. Sumptuary laws. Chief among them, no silk for the grubby masses. Silk was for the fancy lads, the scholars, the bureaucrats, the whole rotten structure of the imperial court. Commoners were meant to plod around in drab, scratchy hemp like God and the emperor intended. Anyone caught in a silken blouse got a flogging. Merchants dealing it to the lower classes faced a far stickier end. The man thought you could build an empire by color-coding your subjects, an absolute dope, so he was. But here's the thing about telling people what they can't have. It's the quickest way to make them want it. And if they couldn't have silk, by God, they'd find something else. That something was cotton. Not just any cotton, mind you. We're talking about the good stuff from the south, Nanjing mostly, a soft, sturdy weave that felt like a hug from your granny, and then they dyed it. Oh, the dye, indigo. A color so deep and mesmerizing it looked like a piece of the night sky. Getting that color to stick to cotton was a right bastard of a process, a guarded secret of artisan families who knew more about chemistry than any court alchemist. The result wasn't just cloth, it was a statement. A rich, vibrant, color-fast fuck you to the emperor and his beige-colored dreams. This Nanjing blue became the hottest thing on the street. Naturally, where there's demand, a market will follow, legal or not. The South China Sea, already a messy tangle of pirates and merchants, became the grand highway for contraband cotton. Imagine fleets of smugglers, the indigo mariners, the local histories call them, running bolts of the blue stuff from secret workshops in Fujian to eager buyers from Ryukyu to Malacca. They'd fight off Ming patrol junks with cannons stuffed with tightly wound balls of inferior hemp as a final insult. My favorite is Ao Blue Hand Biyu, a pirate queen from Hainan who built a fortune trading denim for silver and spices. Rumor has it her flagship had sails woven from captured imperial silk, dyed a defiant, mocking blue. The real crack started when the Portuguese showed up. Vasco da Gama docks in Calicut, expecting to trade for a bit of pepper and maybe some cinnamon, and instead finds the local merchants are only interested in one thing, where they can get more of that legendary Nanjing blue. It completely upended the colonial project before it even began. European powers weren't racing for gold or souls anymore. They were in a desperate, centuries-long scramble to control the world's indigo supply. Wool trade collapses. Linen becomes peasant wear. The Dutch East India Company starts issuing its sailors sturdy trousers made from the stuff 3 centuries before Levi Strauss had his big idea. The Ming court, meanwhile, wasted decades and fortunes trying to stamp out the blue jean menace, blind to the fact that their precious empire was unraveling thread by thread, all because they couldn't stand to see a farmer in a nice pair of trousers. Number 4, filed by Captain Bartholomew Finn. That time. The Ottomans got their asses kicked by a bunch of dead fucking cats. Or how the 1770 Russo-Turkish War was decided by flaming feline fuckery. Right, settle in and pour a grog, because this is one for the logbooks. The year is 1770. The place is Smyrna, which was basically the Mos Eisley of the Ottoman Empire, a proper hive of scum, villainy, and suspiciously cheap figs. The whole Eastern Mediterranean is a powder keg because Catherine the Great of Russia is feeling punchy and the Turks are, as is tradition, having a real bad time of it. Things are about to get worse and a hell of a lot weirder. Enter the Gentilhomme, a leaky French merchantman captained by one Edouard Perrier, a man whose business acumen was rivaled only by his profound lack of foresight. See, Edouard had acquired, don't ask how, roughly 10 tons of grade A, 2,000-year-old mummified Egyptian cats. Why? Because the English were grinding them up for fertilizer and paint pigment, and damned if a Frenchman was going to be out-crazied by a bunch of tea-swilling islanders. To Edouard, it was just cargo. To the universe, it was a goddamn comedy heist setup. So, picture the scene. It's a hot, dry Tuesday. The stevedores in Smyrna are offloading crate after crate of these desiccated, resin-soaked cat bricks. One clumsy bastard, probably named Yusuf, drops a crate. Plumes of millennia-old mummy dust, drier than a temperance meeting and twice as irritable, cloud the air. At that exact moment, Mustafa the One-Eyed, a dock guard with a brain smoother than a riverstone, decides to light his fucking pipe. The resulting foom was, according to a totally not made-up source, like a dragon's fart after a bad kebab. What comes next is pure, unadulterated, physics-based chaos. The mummy dust ignites, chain-reacting through the other crates. Suddenly, the air is full of thousands of tiny, flaming, cat-shaped rockets, their ancient linen wrappers turning them into perfect, screaming projectiles of historical absurdity. Now, here's where Grand Vizier fuck-uppery elevates this from a local cock-up to a geopolitical clusterfuck. The main Ottoman gunpowder magazine for the Aegean fleet was located, with tactical brilliance known only to the truly incompetent, right next to the busiest commercial docks. A solid dozen of these pharaonic fireballs go rocketing through the magazine's wide-open door. The resulting explosion didn't just rattle the windows, it rearranged the goddamn map. It took the entire Ottoman arsenal, half the ships in the harbour, and the left eyebrow of the city's governor with it. When the Russian fleet, under Count Alexei "Hell Yeah" Orlov, showed up for the Battle of Chesma a few weeks later, they found the Ottoman navy already pre-disastered. The battle was less of a naval engagement and more of a mercy killing. The Turks blamed spontaneous combustion, the French blamed Turkish carelessness, and I blame the cats. They waited 2,000 years for their revenge, and honestly, you have to respect the commitment. Number 3, filed by Captain Bartholomew Finn. Captain Cook fucks up, discovers fuck all. Famed navigator gets stuck in icy shithole. Star botanist Joseph Banks invents taxonomy for sad frozen rocks. Let's get one thing straight. James Cook was an absolute razor blade of a navigator. The man could chart a course across a puddle of spilled rum. But even a genius gets saddled with idiots. And on his first Pacific voyage, his idiot-in-chief was the fabulously wealthy, plant-obsessed fop, Joseph Banks. Banks was the Royal Society's golden boy, a walking trust fund with a flower press, and he'd paid a king's ransom to come along and catalogue every weird-ass plant Cook could find in his magical southern continent. Unfortunately, Thanks to a combination of a wonky chronometer, a midshipman who couldn't tell a sextant from his own arsehole, and a fog bank thick as a politician's promise, the Endeavour missed Tahiti and Australia, and literally everything else useful. Instead, in late 1770, a sickening crunch announced their arrival on an uncharted spike of rock off the coast of Antarctica. They weren't sunk, but they were stuck. Proper, royally fucked on a frozen shithole 1,000 miles from nowhere, with winter coming on. At first, Cook, ever the professional, organised survival. The crew, who'd signed on for island beauties and easy living, were now clubbing penguins for dinner and looking at each other with a glint in their eyes that suggested long pig might soon be on the menu. But the real story, the true masterclass in delusion, was Joseph Banks. Faced with a complete and utter lack of interesting flora, Banks's aristocratic brain simply short-circuited. He refused to admit defeat. With the grim-faced crew sucking on penguin bones to stave off scurvy, Banks was having the time of his life, discovering new species. He wasn't finding plants, of course. He was finding ice and rocks, but by God, he catalogued them. His journals, later published as A Patriot's Botanical Observations on the Frigid Realm, are a monument to denial. He describes in florid detail lichen mortuus desperatio, dead despair lichen, and alga frigida non commodenti, cold inedible seaweed. His masterwork was a 9-page entry on the subtle crystalline foliage of frost. He classified 47 distinct types of frost patterns, giving them grand Latin names and claiming they represented a whole new kingdom of life, the regnum gelidum. One apocryphal diary entry from a terrified seaman just reads, "Mr. Banks tried to press a snowflake today. He wept for an hour when it melted. We ate another penguin. I think I am going mad." When a passing whaler finally rescued the survivors 2 years later, they found a cult of hollow-eyed madmen who smelled permanently of boiled bird. Banks returned to London a hero of his own making, presenting his collection of frozen rocks and sad, desiccated moss to a baffled Royal Society. He was politely laughed out of the building. The only lasting impact was on British cuisine, which suffered through a 3-month craze for Penguin Wellington, a dish whose only virtue was that it tasted slightly better than starving to death in Antarctica. Number 2. Filed by Sir Bobbin ni Loingsai, the prophetic ponchos of PUMAWANKA. What if Inca weavers were the goddamn oracles of Delphi, but with more llamas and better thread counts? All right, you filthy animals, settle in, because our resident yarn wizard Sir Bobbin ni Loingsai has dropped a real brainbender on us, and frankly, I'm hard. We all know the official story about Inca quipus. Those knotty little fellas were basically the world's most complicated spreadsheets, used for tracking taxes and counting how many llamas took a dump on Tuesday. Boring. The pocket protector crowd of academia loves this shit because it makes the Inca seem like sensible, boring accountants. Accountants who built Machu Picchu, sure, but accountants nonetheless. But what if, and you need to open your grimy little third eye for this, the Quipu weavers weren't accountants? What if they were a secret coven of fiber-based mystics, the true power behind the Sapa Inca? Imagine a bunch of old ladies chewing coca leaves and spinning vicuña wool so fine it could slice a fart into thirds, just looking into the roiling chaos of space-time. They're not counting beans, they're gazing into the future and seeing pale, bearded, syphilis-riddled dickheads sailing over the horizon in giant wooden bathtubs. And they don't just gasp and write a strongly worded letter to the gods. They pick up their shuttles and get to fucking work. So Francisco Pizarro rolls up to Cajamarca, his conquest dick throbbing with fantasies of gold and god-bothering. He's expecting a bunch of primitives who will shit their loincloths at the sight of a horse. Instead, Emperor Atahualpa just calmly orders his men to unroll a series of absolutely massive tapestries. Pizarro's probably thinking, oh, cute, a welcome picnic? But these aren't picnic blankets. They are, as one, probably fake, chronicler Friar Diego de las Coronas put it, a devil's flowchart for our own damnation. Every Spanish troop movement, every cavalry charge, every tactical blunder was right there, woven in glorious vegetable-dyed detail. A specific "puis tu not" meant Pizarro's left flank is full of dipshits, attack here. A dye sequence of cochineal red, indigo piss yellow was a precise topographical map showing where to trigger the rock slide. The Spanish didn't stand a chance. It was less a battle and more a live-action unboxing of their own richly deserved demise, with the Inca holding the IKEA instructions. It was a total fucking rout. The Inca, armed with foreknowledge woven into literal battle flags, dismantled the Spanish expedition before it could even get its boots muddy. Pizarro himself, in a move predicted by a particularly snarky bit of alpaca hair embroidery, got tangled in a knotted bola and brained himself on a sacred rock that the weavers had thoughtfully marked with a big woven X. His last thought was probably, that poncho looks awfully familiar. The whole disastrous European project in the Andes got sent packing, their tails between their legs, muttering about demonic haberdashery. And, at number 1, filed by Magdalena Footlights Rojas Park, we are all meat puppets in the hands of an angry god, with great taste in theatre. How a bunch of Balinese puppeteers and their little shadow friends gaslit an entire planet and turned colonialism into a badly reviewed farce. Every empire is a long-running production with a terrible script, darling. But the Dutch East India Company, that wasn't just a tragedy, it was a goddamn dinner theatre farce with overpriced wine and a cast of ham-fisted goons who couldn't find their arses with a map and a spotlight. They rolled into Bali around 1906, all powdered wigs and syphilis, thinking they were the main characters. They failed to realize the real drama was happening in the shadows, literally. The local dalangs, the master puppeteers of the wayang kulit, had been honing the art of subversive storytelling for centuries. To the Dutch officials sitting sweatily in the front row, it was just, well, who knows what they saw. They were probably too busy calculating how many spices they could jam into their puffy trousers. But for the Balinese audience, the real show was watching the leather puppet of the Ramayana's demon king, Ravana, suddenly develop a suspiciously Dutch-looking moustache and a new, unholy lust for nutmeg. This wasn't just heckling from the stage, it was sedition by way of impeccable light work. The art was in the plausible deniability. What? That portly, flatulent puppet with a tiny crown and an insatiable greed? That's Garuda, the mythical eagle, you uncultured swine, not your governor-general. The idea was too good to stay on one island. It spread through the back alleys and brothels of the world's ports, passed between sailors, exiled artists, and other assorted degenerates who appreciate a good show. A new stage was set for a global theatre of the absurd, a network the history books won't name, but I call the Whispering Proscenium. In Saigon, Vietnamese water puppets began accidentally reenacting the drowning of tax collectors. In British India, Kathakali dancers used their epic makeup to turn haughty viceroys into hideous, green-faced demons with flaccid, twitching noses. The most glorious part. The colonizers couldn't shut it down without admitting that, yes, that ridiculous puppet with the enormous arse was meant to be the Queen of England. Of course, high art is one thing, but a truly great production needs to fuck with the money. The proscenium's magnum opus came in the 1890s, aimed at that mustachioed cunt, King Leopold II of Belgium. A coordinated campaign involving Turkish Karagöz shadow plays, Parisian Grand Guignol, and a series of very naughty nursery rhymes published in London spread a magnificently stupid rumour. The rubber trees in Leopold's Congo Free State were a hoax. The real treasure, the whispers said, was a mountain of pure, uncut Belgian chocolate, guarded by an army of eunuchs who only responded to commands sung in poorly translated Walloon opera. Utterly deranged, completely unbelievable. And yet, trade ministers panicked, speculators hedged their bets. For a glorious 6 months, the Belgian Colonial Office was forced to issue official statements denying the existence of the Great Chocolate Mountain of Wele, making them look like clinically insane chocoholics. It was the death of 1,000 farcical cuts. The empires didn't fall in grand battles, they tripped over the scenery and died of embarrassment. They spent fortunes investigating rumors started by a sock puppet in a fez. Intelligence agencies started hiring theatre critics to decipher the dramaturgical intent of Punch and Judy shows. It proves my central thesis. Politics is just the clumsy, unmiked understudy for theatre. You can't build an empire if the entire world is in the audience, laughing their tits off at you. And trust me, darling, the lighting on their final act was atrocious. That was the Almost Rands for July 2026. A fresh round of dispatches awaits at historic.com. File yours before midnight, and you might just dodge this list next month. From the Historic Desk, good night.